Hi, thanks for watching. Let's look at the internal structure for Xingyi Quan. When I talk about the internal structure, sometimes I talk about the frame of the style. So the way the body's held, the alignment, the mechanics, and this is a frame because this is the structure around which all of the skills and techniques and postures are built on. If you don't have the frame solid, then you can put things onto this frame, but they're all going to be a little bit wobbly. And so we want to be clear about what this frame or alignment or structure is and get that solid so that it's not the thing we have to correct when we're doing our training. So the first part is to understand and have this frame become second nature. So what we'll do is we'll break that apart segment by segment, look at what the internal structure of Xingyi is. We'll then look at how that affects the internal dynamics, the lines of force, how the force is generated. And then at the end, we'll also look at a training drill that helps use this to build that full body power or the integrated power, which is so characteristic of Xingyi. So of course, with Xingyi, it's the Santi, the standing training, the posture training, that is the fundamental. This builds the frame. Santi. First of all, two main characteristics. One is that it's back weighted, so it's not here. It's weighted with the weight 66.67% on the back leg, give or take. And the other thing about it is that it's focused on the midline. It is a midline stance. Everything is lined up, coming through the midline. When we have this idea of a midline, it extends through to an imaginary line on the ground, and our feet are on either side of that imaginary line, as opposed to one foot in front of the other, which of course, not a very good idea. And also, not too wide a stance. If you were looking at a style that had more of a evasive quality to it, then we'd be looking at a stance that's wide. This is a narrow stance, right? And partly because the training in Xingyi is to drive yourself straight forward towards your opponent, towards your target, which doesn't mean necessarily that you're going straight towards the front of them. You can be coming in at an angle, ideally, but you, in relation to the direction you're going, is that you are lined up facing that way, along the midline, maintaining the back-weighted characteristic of Xingyi. So, if we start with, from there, those two main characteristics, let's look at the feet. With the basic stance of Xingyi, front foot pointing straight forward, back foot on an angle, but not 45 degrees, less than 45 degrees. 25 degrees? Sure, something like that. Weight is on the back leg. The distance between the two feet should be the length of your shin. So if you drop your knee should be at the back of your heel, or your foot should just be in front of that. So that is the length, self-correcting, sized according to the person themselves. Each person's stance will be a little bit different based off the length of their shin. Now for the hip, this is the interesting part. With the structure of the legs, to get the alignment in the hip, we want to roll in the thighs, but then roll out at the shins. If you saw my earlier video, which was on the internal structure of Chen style Tai Chi, you'll notice that this is the exact opposite. Chen style Tai Chi is one where we roll out at the thighs and then roll in at the shins, so that we have this characteristic structure here. This is different, the reverse, which is roll in at the thighs and roll out at the shins. The way to understand the rollout of the shins, or to find that in your own stance, is first of all, make sure that you close in at the inguinal crease, at the hip crease. So you're setting into the hips. But then from there, you want to make sure that both knees are pointing straight forward. Even though this back foot is on a small open angle, you don't want the knee to be pointing this way. You want the knee to be pointing straight ahead. Both knees pointing straight ahead, not both knees pointing in, helps you find that roll out of the shins. This puts the head of the femur deep into the hip socket. Chen style Tai Chi, even though it's exactly the reverse, has a similar sort of effect, where what we want to do is we want to set into the hip, deep into the hip. And both of these seemingly contradictory pairs of instructions, roll in here, roll out there, gets you set into the hip. That's very characteristic. You can see people who haven't quite figured this out by simply looking at the structure of their hips. If this looks like they're standing on top of their hip, you know that the hip position is not the requirement for this style. If they're set into the hips, center of gravity a little bit lower, set into the hips, then they have figured out how to position the leg structures so we have the hip socket set and you have the strength into the legs. From there, relax the low back, lift the torso up, keep the shoulders set down. The arm that's extended, that shoulder is forward. Oh, first, with the body structure, it's back weighted. But back weighted is not achieved by doing this, bringing the upper body back. It's achieved by bringing the hips back, so that you want your hips over top of your back heel. This allows the body to be more upright. Then the arm is extended, but when we extend the arm, we extend through the shoulder. And when we extend through the shoulder, this is not a reach that affects the torso. So instead of something that brings the torso and rotates it forward, keep the torso set, but extend the shoulder blade. So there's a difference from extending through the shoulder or extending through the torso. And extending through the torso then changes the alignment through the hips, which you don't want. You want the hips square, the body upright, extend through the shoulder, but not through the ribs. Other hand, of course, basically as at the front, hip close to the body, palm facing down. This general characteristic of Xingyi is that we have the upper arm and elbows always close to the body. Whether we're coming through, drilling up, whether we're launching through and extending with a strike, the elbows are always in as opposed to out. There's a couple of different reasons for this, 3 different reasons. One of them is that we're keeping the arm to cover the ribs here, to cover the armpit and the striking points that are here. And of course, for grappling techniques, which then grab the elbow, roll it up, roll it over and disrupt the center of gravity coming through. We try and preempt those possibilities, keeping the elbows tucked in and down, up against close to the ribs. So with this structure, we have to figure out how to make it effective. One thing obviously that becomes apparent is if we have our elbows tucked in and down, close to the ribs, then we don't have reach. We do not have the reach. If we're here in a different fighting style, right, we can extend and reach with the arm. This brings our weight forward, up on the ball of the front foot. We can bring the elbow out, extend the shoulder, and extend through the torso and hip. This gives us our reach. And the power for that kind of strike comes from the hip and shoulder, rolling those forward for the strike. Xingyi does not have this and does not use this because that takes us away from being back-weighted, set down into the hips. And so here, what we can do to make up for that absence of reach is through footwork. From here, advancing with the front foot and following through gives us more than ample reach. So, with the footwork, the requirement for that beyond the structure is understanding the dynamics that are being held while we're standing. So if we're standing in this posture, there's still a push and a pull that happens through the legs. They're actively engaged and working towards and against each other at the same time. Simply meaning that if we're here, the back leg is like a spring that wants to push us forward. The front foot is placed on the ground firmly to hold us in place. So if we were to lift the front foot, automatically we move forward because the back foot is pushing us forward. If from here, actively engaging both legs, and we lift the back foot, we'd automatically move back. So there is no preparation time required for an initial move forward or an initial move back, because the legs are constantly engaged and pushing against each other. Because at Xingyi, we're mainly interested in driving forward. And so the best way to think of this, I think, is to think of it as the back leg as a spring, and the spring gets released when we lift the front foot. The momentum then carries us through to push us a second time to get into the strike. Because the arms are held close to the body, then the strike happens, and the power of the strike happens not from here and here with this punch, but happens here and the ground, pushing off the heel, coming through here. The strength comes through the whole body as a single unit. And so this kind of structure is the one that provides the integrated power, or the full body power of Xingyi. Instead of moving the force through the body segment by segment, engaging the muscles through here, we instead, as a different technique, as a different approach, using the power of the leg and the momentum of the whole body to come through for our strike. So this is how the Xingyi structure relates to this concept of full body power or integrated power. You want all of the techniques, all of the striking techniques to be happening using the body as a single unit. When the point of contact or impact happens, is being hit by the whole body coming through, not just one part of the body. So Guoyong, Xingyi master in Beijing, has a technique for developing or fine-tuning this integrated power, assuming you have the idea of this internal structure. The stake pounding that he suggests, you can find this in the English translation of his book, Guoyong's Xingyi Quan. It's translated by my teacher, Andrea Falk. This is in the first volume. It's a 3-volume set. But the stake pounding posture comes from the Santi Shi, the Santi stance. From here, the extended arm, we just bring it, close the hand, and bring the other palm on the inside of the wrist, so that we have this kind of structure of the hand, like so. Weight is, everything else with the structure is the same, so the adjustment is simply from here to here. We use this structure, and what we're doing is we're lifting the front heel, dropping the weight back, drawing the hands in, and then setting the weight down into the front heel and expanding into the arms. The important point to keep in mind is that this is not having the body structure go back and forward, back and forward. It's not a rocking forward and back kind of posture. It's one where we're drawing in and then we're expanding out. this way, as opposed to this way, right? In other words, instead of it being this kind of motion here, where here we still draw back, we draw the arms in, but the intent is on driving the heel down and using that force to expand the body and the arms out, away from each other, from low back to elbows, moving out. That expansive quality is what we want to use, is the internal power of integrated full body power, is one where the whole body comes and sets once it makes contact with the ground, once it makes contact with its strike. So of course, this you do on both sides, and use that as a way to assess your development of your frame. The correction is not to do more of the stake pounding. The correction is to reassess the structure that you're holding in the body, especially through the thighs and the hips and through the shoulders, and find this structure as a correction to getting this more solid. So I hope that information is helpful for you. Keep training, keep learning. Take care.